The SEC's database for all those filings that companies make with the SEC to make their information publicly available is called Edgar. It's a popular name, almost a household name today on Zippy Point.
Quick Zips by Zippy Point.
Quick and dirty. I'm Brock Romanek and I'm a big fan of yous. Pretty excited that I got my dog in the video today. They 250 of these and I finally got Willa in. Willa, say hello. Anyways, can you believe at one point, I think it was about 5-6 years ago, the SEC was considering changing Edgar's name. Crazy, I know, given how that SEC's database is branded so heavily with that name. It would lose quite a valuable asset if it made such a move. Luckily, that idea went away fast. The SEC built its electronic filing system for filings way back in the mid-1980s, well before the internet, well before anyone else was thinking about electronic repositories. And while it was still in the pilot stage, the SEC coined it Edgar, officially named it Edgar, the acronym for its official name of Electronic Data Gathering, Analysis, and Retrieval. Here are a few things to know about how Edgar got its name and a flavor of those early days of Edgar. In the early 1980s, then SEC Chair John Shedd decided to really press for an electronic database of filings, a concept first floated by then Corp Fin Director Lee Spencer in a speech. And this is at a time when personal computers were not a thing. No one knew anything about computers either. If you transmitted anything electronically, which was rare, you literally physically handed over a disk or a tape. So it was really considered a wild idea for the SEC to try to build an electronic database. Research bureaus at the time made a bundle because they would send people down to the SEC to copy the paper filings that companies made. So companies were still making filings, they were just doing it on paper. FedEx, on a 10Q or a 10K due date, there would be FedEx trucks lined clear around the block, sometimes several blocks. And I worked at the staff at the time. You go outside and have a little break. My best friend at the time smoked cigarettes, and so he'd call me, hey, I'm going for a smoke. And all right, I'll meet you down there, Mark. And we go down, and it must be a due date for 10Qs, because there they were, all the FedEx trucks. And then these research bureaus would sell those paper filings to clients. So there wasn't a whole lot of transparency about what companies filed with the SEC. It's hard to believe in today's world when everything's so transparent in comparison. So this is what Amy Goodman, who was the one who first headed the SEC's project for Edgar, this is what she told me a few years back about how Edgar got its name. I mean, I'd always known Herb Scholl had coined the name, but I didn't know that then Chair John Shedd held a contest to name Edgar and offered up his own money, a $100 savings bond. Well, $100 stretched a little bit more back then, but it was a savings bond. And anyone at the SEC could participate in this name contest, and hundreds of staffers did. And Herb Scholl, who was working on the project at the time, wound up with the name that Shedd decided to pick, Edgar, which is, again, just the acronym for the name that the SEC already had for the project, Electronic Data Gathering, Analysis, and Retrieval System. But still, it's a brilliant name. It's so easy to remember. It's 2 syllables, all the things that I love. It's unthinkable now, but Edgar was actually quite controversial when it was first conceived. Chair Shedd had to find money in the agency's budget to get Edgar off the ground, and there were members of Congress who really didn't believe in the project, and there were quite a few others that weren't interested in seeing Edgar succeed either, including the financial printers, who didn't realize that they would be making a boatload off of Edgarization of documents down the road. Here's a funny anecdote pulled from an interview with Dan Golzer, who was general counsel at the SEC at the time Edgar was being pushed down the pike, and this interview was posted on the SEC Historical Society's website. I'm just going to kind of paraphrase what Dan said, but one of the things that was important to Chairman Shedd was that it be self-funded, in other words, funded by the users of Edgar, so that appropriated funds didn't have to be used to support it. Not a popular idea in Congress, because anything off budget means Congress has less control over it. So there were a bunch of hearings about Edgar, all of which were critical to get Edgar to the finish line. And there's quite a battle. In one hearing in particular, Ron Wyden, who's now a senator from Oregon, back then he was in the House, held up a sign called Edgar and said, the SEC is trying to devise a system. Edgar is supposed to stand for Electronic Data Gathering and Retrieval, but this system won't be able to retrieve data. And he tore the R off the sign. It won't be able to analyze data. He tore off the D. He tore the off the sign. It won't be able to whatever, you get the idea. He kept pulling off letters until he was left with a sign that said Ed, and he folded out the front of the sign, which hadn't been visible before, and says Mr. So now he's holding up a sign that says Mr. Ed, and he says, the SEC has as much chance of creating the system as it does in finding a talking horse. Great story. Here's another interesting Edgar anecdote from Amy. Not only was the SEC ahead of its time in building an electronic database, the SEC actually looked at the possibility of using artificial intelligence back in the early 80s as part of this. Arthur Anderson was a consultant on the project, and they were doing some interesting things. So the SEC looked at that and considered somehow making AI part of the now defunct financial data schedule. For those old timers remember the financial data schedules that were actually in the back of some filings and were completely useless. No one ever used it, and eventually the SEC allowed companies to stop filing that as part of an Edgarization. By the way, check out Amy's interview posted on the SEC Historical Society site. There's some good stuff in there. So one last note, Amy had framed a picture of the first Edgar filing ever made back in 1984, part of the pilot program phase of Edgar. And that first filing was made by the Southern Company. So when Amy retired from Gibson Dunn a few years ago, she handed down that framed picture to Melissa Kane of the Southern Company, who sent me a picture of that first filing. It was a Form S8.